Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, and Ghana. And together with this team, we had an international team, which is under IFPRI PBS BioRap team. And this is led by Judy Chambers. And together, we also had another team which also participated in this work, the policy reform team, to backstop us for this particular study. The objective of this study was to generate local economic estimations to inform policy stroke in financial reforms, resulting in efficient and evidence-based regulatory review of GM crops. So we had operating modalities. In this, we wanted to seek early decision make and country buy-in. And also what was done was also to make sure that it's country-led participatory. There was country-led participatory or collaborative effort by local economists, crop and technology experts. We also had in-country capacity building, including communication skills, development, and in so doing, we used IFPRIs and other economic tools to assess these benefits. The main approach for this assessment was the economic surplus model, which was done using the DreamPi. DreamPi is the revised version of the Dream model, and we used other models to supplement the results and to support the economic surplus estimations. In this, we included the real option model, the stochastic economic surplus model, and also other econometric estimations as input to economic surplus. For instance, the examination of the LSMS surveys. So as I said, this work was done in 5 countries. And in each country, we used, as I said, a consultative process to deliberate on some of those crops which provide food security, and which in each of the countries. And we wanted to know, especially those crops or those products which are ready for commercialization and where there is proof of concept. In Ghana, 2 crops were selected, the nitrogen and water efficient soil tolerant rice, as well as the insect resistant cowpea. In Nigeria, it is.
Can you share your screen, yes, please? We lost the screen.
The presentation.
The presentation, yeah. Can you share it again? It seems like we lost it.
Is it there now? Hello?
Yes, it is. Can you go to full screen mode?
Okay, please. Sorry with the technology.
There you go. Good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. As I said, we had each country. Yeah. Okay. For each country had specific crops which were selected. As I said, Ghana had 2, Nigeria had 1, which is the insect-resistant cowpea. Ethiopia, the water-efficient and stem borer resistant maize. Uganda, 2 also were selected, the brown streak disease-resistant cassava, as well as the bacterial wilt disease-resistant banana. As in Tanzania, also 2 crops were selected for the brown streak disease-resistant cassava, and then the water efficient and stem borer resistant maize. So in each country, estimation were done by region. So we had regional disaggregated results, and we had model parameters which we used to estimate this model. These parameters were based on information we got from local and international experts' opinion, as well as some econometric estimations. So multiple scenarios were considered for this. We are considered for during the estimation, and we are varying across or within the countries. We included adoption rates, for instance, biophysical characteristics, for instance, the drought probabilities. We also used the yield and cost changes, the R&D, regulatory and adoption timelines, and many others. In some countries where we had enough data, our estimation was disaggregated by sex. So I'm presenting you some of the summary of the results for our study. What we realized was that values which were estimated, for instance, we estimated the annual net benefits by each kind of millions USD, and to up to about 207 million USD in Tanzania. So here the values were converted using the exchange rates and the world development indicators, triple P conversion factors. And you can see their variation in terms of crops and countries or traits. You can see that each trait has a benefit, was estimated to generate a benefit which varies across countries. And for instance, if you see the Ghana, it looks to be small, but this is because we are looking at a nitrogen use efficient rice. So in this case, the economic surplus model wouldn't estimate most of the benefit, because this trait or this rice is supposed to be stacked with another gene, which is looking at drought tolerance and saline tolerance. So in this case, maybe the benefit might be much more if it's to be estimated after stacking it with those genes. And these results, after generating these results, we tried to look at the internal rate of return by each country. And the outcome here is tied to the cost of technology transfer within a particular country. And we are looking at only those costs which are related to the further development within the country to comply with the biosafety and other regulations. Some R&D costs were not included here, which we are done elsewhere, but we are only looking at those within the country or each country. So you can see positive IRRs for each country and looking at the different traits. And we are only here, we are showing you the most likely scenario, and it proved to be positive for all traits. And these estimations, as already mentioned, they are based on the DreamPy and the Dream models. So after that, we shocked our estimates with a 5-year delay due to R&D or regulatory issues. So we wanted to see what can happen to these benefits if there is that kind of delay, to examine the value for money which is being invested in these technologies. Also, it gives us kind of a sense of the regulatory enabling environment. For when you look at these results, if you when you shock it by 5 years, the benefits we are estimated decrease. There's a loss in the benefit, which ranges between 45% in Nigeria, that is in percent in Uganda. So across all countries, there is a loss in benefits if there is any delay in regulation or R&D issues. So given that, At this stage, we came up with some kind of policy statements. Like, for instance, if you look at the first one, the R&D and innovation, comfort and increasing. From this, it shows that increasing complex policy and regulatory landscape is expected, and innovation strategies to ensure deployment of variable public and private and multiple multi-sector technologies need to be addressed, and in this there are likely to be multiple government issues which are likely to be addressed in order to access these benefits. So, and we also need to confront the reality of the limited innovative capacity countries. So in a case, if you are to make sure that these benefits realized by the different countries, there are many issues which need to be addressed. So in conclusion, I can say that the examined GM crop provide positive economic benefits if they perform as expected, and the potential benefits are contingent on the enabling environment in which GM crops operate. So the need exists to ensure that decision policymakers reach an understanding of the concept, limitation, and caveats of the ex-ante economic assessment to ensure impacts and expected performance dependent on the enabling environment in the country of lease. So a potential major constraint is the innovative capacity involved in countries. So the communication, stock outreach, capacity enhancement approaches, we need to incorporate and understand all these above if these technologies are to be realized in the countries which are.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, and thank you, Enoch. So we'll be holding questions until the end of the session. Our next speaker is Xiaoli Fan. Excellent, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Xiaoli Fan. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Resource Economics and Environmental Sociology. So today I'm presenting the effect of considerations for future consequences on consumer preference for GM potatoes in Canada. And this is joint work with Ellen Goddard, my colleague, also at U of Alberta, and she's also a speaker of today's session. First is a little bit of the motivation for this study. So as we know, there's widespread opposition to GM foods for consumers around the world. And one of the reasons that consumers don't like GM food is because there's concern for the risk in the long run. And it seems like that some consumers, they have concerns for the consequences for future, and that is the motivation for this work. And in response to those concerns, there are some recently developed GM food, which the developer incorporated the environmentally friendly, and also some other products have health benefits in the long run. So first is a little bit introduction of what is consideration for future consequences. So it is the extent to which consumers prefer future versus immediate consequences of their current behaviors. So it's a very important personality trait, and that is affecting food choices. And especially if those choices include environmental and health benefits. So the objective of this study is to examine the effects of CFC on consumer acceptance and also their willingness to pay for GM potatoes in Canada. And here I listed the health and environmental benefits, which are two attributes of the product of the potatoes that we looked at. We also studied several other attributes, which I'm gonna present in a little bit. So consideration for future consequences, this is kind of a hypothesis of our research, is that there's generally two different types of consumers or individuals. So the first type, we call them high time preference individuals, or those individuals who's more present oriented. So those kind of individuals, they since they have high preference for current, and they tend to be less patient and ignore the CFC, the consideration for future consequences. And the expectation is that they will have lower willingness to pay for products with long-term benefits. And on the other hand, there's another type of consumers who's low time preference, and they are more future oriented, and they are more concerned about the long-term consequences of their food choices. So those type of consumers, they tend to have higher willingness to pay for products with long-term benefits. So in our study, we studied the GM potatoes, and I'd like to have a little bit introduction of the GM potatoes. So first is potato are the world's third most important food crop after rice and wheat. This is in terms of human consumption. And the first generation GM potatoes, which has a name called New Leaf, it was released by Monsanto in 1995. And not long after that, there's a strong opposition from consumers, and Monsanto has to pull that GM potato off the market. And also I should mention here that that potato is mainly resist to pests. And then in 2015, and also in Canada is 2016, there's the second generation GM potatoes, which has another name called Innate. So this time it's developed by J.R. Simplot. It's one of the largest of the potato producers in North America. So this second generation potato was approved for sale in the US and in Canada. And there's also gene-edited potatoes in the pipeline. And J.R. Simplot is using CRISPR-Cas9 to develop a gene-edited potato. And there's also another company which are using a different technology, different gene editing technology to develop the gene-edited potatoes. So a little bit introduction of the data and the method that we use for this research. So what we did is we conducted a Canadian-wide online survey. We collected a little bit more than 3,000 responses. And in that survey, we had stated choice experiments. And using that experiment, we collect data on consumer acceptance of the potato with different attributes. So in that survey, we also included a CFC 12-item scale question to have a sense of consumers' consideration for future consequences. And after we collected the data, we used the random parameters logic model or the mixed logic model to analyze the effect of CFC on consumer willingness to pay for the different attributes. For the choice experiments, we chose the frozen French fried potatoes as the product of interest. So the reason is that because almost 60% of the potatoes available in Canada are processed potatoes. And one of the attributes that we studied, or the JR Simplot, when they announced this potato is going to be approved for sale in Canada, they mentioned that one of the attributes is that this potato is heavily reduced acrylamide, which is a possible carcinogen. And this acrylamide occurred when potatoes are cooked at high temperatures. So that's why we choose the French fried potatoes. And in our steady choice experiments, we have 48 choice sets, and we have 8 choices for each respondent, and there's 4 choices, 4 options in that choice experiment, which include a opt-out options. So these are the attributes and levels that we use in our choice experiment. And as we can see, the first attribute here is acrylamide, and there's 2 levels, which one of them is 0, which means there's no reduction of acrylamide, and the other one have negative 62%. And then we also include the attribute of reduced waste due to browning. So this jam potato is claimed to be able to reduce the waste. And also another attribute is that this potato can help reduce the pesticides application by 45%. And we also included several technologies for the potato. We have a baseline, which is the conventional. Then the other 3, we have GM transgenic, GM cisgenic, or intragenic, and gene editing. During the experiments, we explained the difference between those different technologies. And we also include the developer of the potato, and we included Monsanto, which was the first, which was the developer of the first generation jam potato, and JR Simplot, which is the developer of the second generation potato. And we also included a government, and in the baseline, it's a no-name company. And we have several price levels there. So here is the demographic characteristics of our sample. In general, it's representative of the Canadian population. And I do have here of the responses of this respondents for the CFC 12 item scale. And here on the left is the questions that we asked. And we asked them to identify their CFC level in a 5 Likert scale. And you can notice here that some questions, if you are low preference, you tend to have higher scores, and the ones in the green font, those are the questions that if you're low time preference, then your score should be lower. So there's 12 questions in total. These are the first 6, and the mean of those scores are in line with our expectation that low time preference individuals tend to have higher scores for some of the questions. And we also, here are the other 6 questions. And again, the answers or the scores of the different individuals are in line with our expectation. We also summarized the demographic characteristics by the CFC group. So here we, sorry, I forgot to mention that we divided the sample into 2 groups. One is high time preference group, which are the individuals who tend to be future oriented, and the other group is high time preference. So those are the present oriented individuals, and they are generally different. And there's 1,681 in the low time preference group, and the number of individuals in the high time preference group is a little bit less than that. And what we found is that here this is the results for the willingness to pay for those different attributes. And I have here the results for the full model, which means I included everybody in my model. And then I also have the results for the low time preference and high time preference, those two types of individuals. So we looked at 9 attributes, and as you can see here, the first 3 are the product traits. So the traits includes acrylamide reduction, waste reduction, and pesticide reduction. And then the next 3 are about technologies. So those 3 are GM cisgenic, intragenic, or GM transgenic, or gene editing. And at last, there's also 3 attributes. Those are the developers of the technology. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time here explaining the results. So these are the willingness to pay results, and they first look at the product traits, and for the low time preference individuals there. So those are the individuals who are concerned about future more, and they tend to have a higher willingness to pay for the acrylamide reduction attributes than the high time preference individuals. So this is on average. And this acrylamide reduction is kind of a health benefit. And the next 2, waste reduction and pesticide reduction, tend to be the environmental benefits. And we also find the same is that the low time preference individuals tend to have a higher willingness to pay for those environmental benefits. And on the last column here is the difference in the willingness to pay, which is willingness to pay of the low time preference group minus the willingness to pay of the high time preference group. And for the technologies, the story is different. So the low time preference group, or the people who are future oriented, they have a lower willingness to pay for the 3 different GM technologies. And for the developers, it's interesting is that the future oriented or the low time preference individuals, they tend to have a higher willingness to pay for government as the developer, and they don't like Monsanto, so they have a much lower willingness to pay for Monsanto as the developer. We also calculated the individual willingness to pay distribution based on the demographic characteristics of the individuals in our surveys. So here again there are 9 different attributes, and it's similar to the previous table. There are 3 product traits, 3 technologies, and 3 developers. The solid lines are the low preference or the future oriented individuals, and the dashed lines are the high preference or the present oriented individuals. And we can see here that for the product traits, those 3 traits, the low preference or the future oriented, they tend to be on the right. So the distribution is located to the right of the distribution for the high preference individuals. And for the technology, we can also say that the future oriented individuals, their whole distribution is swift to the left. For the developer, is different story. Is Monsanto is here, where the future oriented individuals, they tend to have a lower willingness to pay for Monsanto as a developer. So in conclusion, we find that time preference can really influence Canadian consumer willingness to pay and acceptance of the GM and gene-edited potatoes. And those low time preference or the future-oriented consumers, they are willing to pay a price premium for both the environmental and the health attributes. And the present-oriented consumers, they are more acceptable of the potatoes developed by the GM and gene editing technologies. And there's a last point is that the future-oriented consumers, they really don't like Monsanto as the developer. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that very interesting presentation. Willingness to pay. Our next speaker is going to be Ellen Goddard. And while Ellen's loading her slides, just an encouragement to all of our attendees to go ahead and use the chat to pose questions at any time. We'll revisit those questions for discussion at the end.
Okay.
We can see those slides. Great.
I'm Ellen Goddard. I'm also from the University of Alberta, and it doesn't look quite like what Xiaoli has behind her at the moment. It's getting a little bit snowy even today, unfortunately. I'm going to talk about some research that I've been doing for a while on applications of genomic technology for disease resilience in a number of different animals, mostly in pigs, but we've also looked at it in, are starting to look at it in dairy cattle as well. So we have lots of diseases in pigs, for example, including the very threatening African swine fever that people in North America are particularly concerned about at the moment. But even before that, we've had lots of examples of very economically important diseases. So if we can develop more disease resilient pigs and or cattle, then likely we will reduce the costs. But at the same time, we've had this massive development of antibiotic resistant bacteria, which is affecting the use of antibiotics in livestock production because the development of antibiotic resistant bacteria is such a heavy public health threat. So we've got a situation here where there's a technology application that could be developing more disease resilient pigs, but people are a little bit still uncertain about the application of the technology. And we've got the fact that the technology might be able to reduce the use of antibiotics in livestock production, which could be seen as a public health benefit. And we're trying to unpack, and this is some of our initial research as to what ways the public could see to handle those kind of trade-offs. So even if, I should also say that certain diseases in the pig industry already have gene editing solutions, and those haven't been applied commercially yet because there's still some regulatory issues that need to be addressed. And it's interesting to try and figure out if it was pitched in a way that was more focused on the level of antibiotics that might be reduced in the application in the raising of pigs if they're gene edited to not be susceptible to disease, whether that's something that might change people's minds. So this is the space that we're working in, and I'm really interested in presenting a little bit of research to see if the public wants to see continued investment in research to increase the use of genomic tools in breeding for higher disease resilience, and how that compares to what their interest might be in producing alternatives to antibiotics to maintain livestock production. In that case, without necessarily reducing the disease, but certainly being able to treat the disease and ensure that it doesn't spread as widely as things like African swine fever have done. Okay, so the research is coming from 2 Genome Canada projects that I've been working on from 2010 till recently. And we have a lot of things going on in the Genome Canada projects on the social science side, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about one small piece of the public acceptance research. What we have found across these years is that responses are very different when you just identify the trait versus identifying the technology that's applied to develop the trait. And sometimes you can change people's minds if you add in ancillary information like, maybe we'll gene edit these pigs to get rid of the disease, and we'll actually specify how much that would reduce antibiotic applications. So we've got a number of different approaches to try and come up with these measures. What I'm going to talk about today is very specific research where we used referendum type questions about public research investment. Initially, we thought perhaps before we did the research that if the public doesn't like the technology, they might not want to see further public monies invested in that type of research. Anyway, that's wrong, I can tell you right now. But we also were trying to unpack if it mattered. For example, on the livestock side, does it matter what species it's in? Does it matter which technique you're using? And do any of those change the desire for public investment in these technologies? So in 2012, for example, we asked a question that was very specific. It was about the use of genomic information in selective breeding for disease resistance in pigs. In 2020, about a month ago, actually, we did a different application in the dairy industry, and we wanted to ask a very similar question, but you'll notice that the use of genomic information is for a lot more traits than just for disease resilience, but disease resilience is there, and it's a dairy application. But we have also been doing all this parallel research on the public interest in antibiotic resistance. And I could bore you to death with everything that we know and how concerning some of the things we know are about that. But in this context, we also asked a question about research investment. And it was really research to develop alternatives to the use of antibiotics. I'm very concerned about a lack of connection there seems to be in the minds of many people in the public about how beneficial antibiotic-free production, defined by them to mean no antibiotics have ever been used in the life of the animal, how beneficial that is seen to be and how easy they think that that is to achieve. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but they do not seem to realize that there's an animal welfare implication if we can never use antibiotics in the life of the animal. And that's a potential concerning issue. So in this case, we discussed the fact that we would obviously need to pay higher taxes to cover the research costs to develop the antibiotic alternatives in the same way as funding the research on genomic selection. So these were the immediate answers in our 3 surveys at 3 different points in time and with different contexts around them. The blue one was our first disease-resistant pigs. The orange one was the disease-resilient, as well as other traits, dairy cows. And the gray response is the antibiotic one. And immediately you can see that there's a very high priority put on developing antibiotic alternatives. There's a distaste for the application of antibiotics in livestock production that comes out in that particular survey. Just to give you a really brief idea of what happened when we ran some regression models on these things, I wanted you to see some of the variables that came out to be consistent or not consistent across time. Just a couple of things. Obviously, the tax level is significant regardless. Most of the demographic variables are significant sometimes and not significant other times. We do have people in our samples who do not necessarily consume the products that might emanate from these animals that could be becoming more disease resilient. And we wanted to see if whether or not people actually eat the food product out of the animals made a difference. And it made a difference in the antibiotic one, but not at all in the other two. But regardless of whether people eat the product or not, often the survey respondents actually do purchase the product, so maybe for other people in their households. And so we thought maybe if you're a more frequent purchaser, maybe that makes a difference to your attitude about how much the public research dollars should be. And we found out that there did seem to be more impact of that in terms of very frequent meat purchasers wanted to see more research on genomics for disease resilience. And when we were looking at the dairy case, yogurt purchasers wanted to see more dollars on research, but milk purchasers didn't. And I can tell you that they're not the same kinds of consumers at all. So that difference didn't surprise us. A little bit of an effect on trust in the government to handle funds made a difference. In 2020, other aspects of technology, like whether they'd heard about it before or they thought the world was better off due to technology, had an impact. But then we come down to some more fundamental attitudes. And in the first case, we're talking about something called an animal attitude score, which is a really fundamental belief about how animals should be used in society. And that is important right throughout. And I can tell you in most of the livestock genomics research we've been doing, that attitude score almost explains everything that we've actually looked at. Interestingly enough, animal husbandry, which is more about how farm animals are treated specifically, whether you believe that they're being treated properly, pigs in the first case, dairy cows in the second case, is also very important to wanting to see more research dollars invested in the development of genomic solutions. It has no importance in the antibiotic case. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, this animal attitude scale is really incredibly fundamental to almost all the results that we got. And I thought it would be useful for you to see the types of questions that are in the scale and how the various responses to these questions were across time. The researcher that developed the scale way back in 1991 did a revisit of it in 2015 and said, oh, well, we probably don't need 12 items anymore. 5 key items seem to pick up most of the variation. So we can focus on those 5 items. The one at the bottom is it's morally wrong to hunt animals for sport. And the third one up is there's nothing morally wrong with hunting wild animals for food. And that's been reversed, which is why it's negative. I think it's perfectly acceptable for cattle and hogs to be raised for human consumption, has also been reversed. I sometimes get upset when I see wild animals in cages at zoos. So this is not, it's a set of beliefs about how animals should be treated. And it's really interesting that the aggregate of the scores on these various individual items is really, really important in almost everything that we've looked at in terms of what the public believes about livestock production, and certainly what they want to see happen in terms of livestock production. So it's very much beyond the farm level, if you like, in terms of its impact on decision making. This is the distribution of the willingness to pay that came from our regression models. And when you look at it, and when you look at the means of the willingness to pay, this is as a proportion of a weekly food budget. And the weekly food budget was estimated to be about $125. So it's a pretty significant mean. And you can see that the vast majority of the individuals are clustered between $0 and $50. And some very odd people are willing to pay massive amounts, of course. And it looks like the distribution is very different for the investment in antibiotic alternatives, which is the gray one, as compared to the others. But if you just look at the mean, there isn't that much difference. There may also be a slight change in the valuation of additional research dollars being spent on genomic tools for selective breeding for disease resilience. It's a little bit higher in 2020 than it is in 2012, but across the samples that we looked at, there is not a huge difference. And we've tracked other things, and we've done other surveys that I didn't report here between 2012 and 2020. And if you put them all together, it looks like a very smooth path of adjustment, if there's any adjustment whatsoever. And in the grand scheme of things, these beliefs are pretty fundamental. So just to summarize, in this particular case, and remember, we can't force the people to realize that their dollars spent here are not going to be dollars spent on schools or other sorts of public investments. Although we say that in the surveys, it's not clear they take it into consideration. But there is support for public investment in the research. And it doesn't necessarily be totally associated with whether or not we eat the products. In some cases, people want to see the research done because they're just worried about the animals. And all of this research shows that the livestock context of decision-making seems to be driven by your fundamental attitudes towards animals in general, more than about specific farm animals. And those attitudes are very similar across time. Of course, there's fluctuation because the samples are different people with different values and different exposure to media and other things at any point in time. But in the grand scheme of things, they're remarkably stable across the population. And there is this overwhelming concern about getting rid of antibiotics in livestock production. And it's possible that this is being reinforced by the antibiotic-free marketing that many of our restaurants are being encouraged aggressively to participate in. But it's not showing up necessarily as a really dramatically higher interest in research for antibiotic alternatives. And I think that's possibly because the public is not really seeing the connection to animal welfare. They seem to think that pulling antibiotics out is purely optional in the production system, and it's just going to be a good thing. And some of our other research suggests that that's because they have a higher concern about residues than they do actually even about antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And with that, I will say thank you and acknowledge some of my collaborators and funders of this research. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ellen. Our next speaker is Chelsea Sutherland.
All right, my name is Chelsea Sutherland. I'm a master's student in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the University of Saskatchewan. And today I'm going to be talking to you about a recent article titled Canadian Consumer Insights on Agriculture Addressing the Knowledge Gap. And it's a project I worked on with Dr. Smythe, Savannah Gleim, and Cassidy Sim. So I'll give you a brief background of this project. We know that agriculture is a significant contributor to Canada's economy. Between 2012 and 2016, agricultural gross domestic product grew by 11%. And at the same time, the Canadian economy as a whole grew by only 7.8%. There's also been a decline in Canadians living in rural areas. So between 1921 and 2016, this number decreased from 46% to only 19%. So it's needless to say that the average Canadian is disconnected from the production of their food. This is supported by some research from the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, and they found that between 2017 and 2018, there was actually a decline in the positive impression of Canadian agriculture, and this was the first decline seen since 2006. But this problem is a little bit more difficult to solve than simply providing consumers with more information. In our literature review, we discussed two topics. The first is information overload, and the second is the rationally ignorant consumer hypothesis. And both of these topics, they allude to how you can't just simply provide consumers with more information. It really needs to be targeted to their values and to their lifestyles. And it also needs to be more beneficial to them than it is costly for them to obtain. So the key is that you really need to target your communication strategies. So where do we even begin in addressing these concerns? We decided to undertake an online survey in 2018. We asked 20 questions to the participants about their knowledge and familiarity with various agricultural topics. And we received 700 responses from English-speaking Canada, and the demographics were very representative of the 2016 Canadian census data. So we'll jump right into the results, and I'll just give you a brief highlight of some of the results just in the interest of time today. How familiar are Canadians with agricultural production? So the first item we have is crop protection. So consumers were very familiar with the terms insecticide, fungicide, and herbicide, as you can see from the chart, but 56% of participants were completely unfamiliar with the term glyphosate, and we were very surprised by this. Glyphosate receives a lot of attention in the media, especially since the 2015 classification by the IARC as glyphosate being probably carcinogenic. However, we thought perhaps that consumers are familiar with this chemical by the popular trade name Roundup instead of by the generic name glyphosate. So we asked consumers if agricultural chemicals are more toxic today than 25 years ago. And we know that chemicals today are far more environmentally benign than they ever were before. But 32% of respondents actually thought that they're more toxic today. The interesting trend here is that the younger the consumer was, the more likely they were to think that agricultural chemicals are more toxic, and the older consumers actually were more likely to say that they were not. There's two reasons we thought might be for this trend. The first one is that agricultural chemicals do receive a lot of negative attention in the media, and we know that younger consumers are often more in tune with what is being presented in the media. Or at the same time, the older generations might just have been around to witness this change in chemical use, while the younger generations were not. And we asked the same question with respect to with 50 years ago, and the responses were very similar. We then asked some more questions. True or false, is pure chemical sprayed on farmers' fields? Of course, this is false. And less than 20% of participants thought that this was true. Again, we saw a little bit of distinction between the age gaps. 28% of participants aged 25 to 44 thought that this was true, versus only 11% aged 55 to 75. But when we turn to the topic of organic production, we asked how many chemical compounds are approved for use in organic production in Canada, and the correct response at the time of the survey was 140. Less than 1% of our participants answered that it was greater than 100, and 88% thought that the answer was less than 25. Here again, we saw some distinction between the age groups. Almost half of participants over the age of 55 thought the answer was 0, compared to only 20% aged 18 to 34. So here we see some distinction again, but it's flipped. It seems that the younger generations are actually perhaps more aware of the production practices used in organic farming. But 83% of millennials report purchasing organic products regularly, compared to only 14% of people born in 1946 to 1964. So it might be just that the people who are purchasing organic are more aware of the practices used in its production. We'll turn to the topic now of animal production. Again, consumers seem to be very familiar with the terms certified humane and hormone-free. As Ellen discussed in her presentation, these are often terms that are discussed in the media and used in marketing strategies, along with antibiotic-free. The term RBST-free here we see was completely unfamiliar to 66% of participants. However, this is a milk production enhancing hormone that is not allowed in Canadian production, but is allowed in American production. And at the time of the survey, there was no American milk on Canadian shelves. So this level of unfamiliarity is not really to be unexpected. All participants were very familiar with antibiotic use to treat illness and infections, and younger participants seemed to be more aware of their use to promote growth. 54% of people aged 18 to 34 were familiar with this practice, compared to only 28% aged 55 to 75. We also asked some other questions, such as different living conditions for various types of livestock, indoor versus outdoor living conditions. We asked about the range of egg farms in Canada that are certified organic, and participants were quite familiar with these small tidbits of information as well. The last topic I'll touch on is soil erosion, and we asked participants how familiar with the terms zero tillage and tillage. And you can see there's quite a varying level of familiarity with these terms. This was a little bit disappointing to see, as the shift from conventional tillage to zero tillage is one of Canadian agriculture's greatest success stories, really, in terms of sustainability. But the unfamiliarity with these terms suggests that consumers might also be unfamiliar with these practices. We asked participants, since 1987, has soil erosion due to farming increased, decreased, or stayed the same? And almost half of participants thought that it has increased. But according to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Soil Erosion Performance Index, there was actually a 19% decrease during this time period. So again, it seems that consumers are perhaps not recognizing this movement towards improved sustainability that Canadian farmers have really taken part in over the last years. And the last question is, which of the following farming methods is likely to cause the most erosion? Summer fallowing or continuous cropping. 40% correctly responded that summer fallow will contribute the most. However, 32% of participants thought that continuous cropping will contribute the most. And again, the removal of summer fallow from farmers' rotations is a really great indicator of the sustainability movement and soil and land stewardship in Canadian agriculture. And it doesn't seem to be being recognized by consumers. So what do these brief results suggest? They suggest that Canadian consumers lack a basic knowledge of agricultural production. It appears, at least from our results, that animal production was the greatest area of consumer knowledge, and some key target areas of communication are crop protection techniques, especially in organic production, and soil erosion. One major concern that emerged was that consumers appeared to have confidence in their familiarity with a lot of these terms, despite not necessarily being adequately informed on the subject. And we know that distrust can often originate in that gap between what people perceive about a topic and the actual processes involved. And we also know that public opinion has a major impact on policy decisions. So for the agriculture industry, improving communication strategies is an urgent priority. So what can the industry do as a whole to address this gap? In our paper, we outlined four actions the industry might consider taking. The first one is to make information easy to access for consumers. So social media and blogs and short articles are really great avenues to reach the average consumer. It's important to connect with the average consumer and make the information relevant to them and to their lifestyles. We could expand into school curriculums. We know Egg in the Classroom is doing a great job of that already, and perhaps this initiative could be expanded further. And also perhaps enter into seniors programs to reach more Canadians than simply those that you would reach through social media. And finally, to target millennials and Gen Xers who have access to these vast social networks and can instantly transmit information with their networks that we share from the industry. So that's everything I have. It was just a really brief overview. If you'd like to read the paper, you can find it in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Information. Thank you.
Wonderful, and thank you, Chelsea. Our next speaker is Kjell Arnsten.
Okay, I'm Kjell Arnst, and I'm a master's student at the University of Alberta. And I think following suit, I am doing a stability of the public demand for a ban on therapeutic antibiotics in livestock. And we'll be looking at a Canadian case. So we'll start with going through some of the literature and of antibiotic use and public perceptions of antibiotic use. So we'll start with the use of antibiotics has been increasingly contentiously in livestock production globally due to the increase in antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, has serious implications on animals and humans around the world regarding effectively treating infections. The WHO, or the World Health Organization, found two main things about AMR related to human health. One, the amount of antimicrobial usage in livestock had an effect on AMR bacteria in food and animals, hence human exposure. And two, there was evidence that the usage of antimicrobials in livestock resulted in resistant organisms which had an adverse effect on human health. Following the public perceptions of this, consumer demand for antibiotic-free meat, like mentioned before, is on the rise, which may be attributed towards these concerns about antibiotic residue in meat. Zing and Stiggs find consumers highly opposed to purchasing meat where the animal has been treated with vaccination. Consumer preferences has also been altered over time, not only for health attributes like extra lean meat, but also with value-added labels like organic. Carl Flick and Ward saw Canadian consumers would be willing to pay a premium for this branded beef. Animal welfare attributes may also affect these preferences. So following in this dimension, we're to talk about the regulatory policy. For the WHO, the FAO, and the OIE, they produced a global action plan on antimicrobial resistance in 2015. 5 objectives were obtained, one of which was to strengthen this knowledge of antimicrobial resistance through surveillance and research. So far, a total of 129 countries have finalized a national action plan to date. Regulatory policy has started to become more restrictive over time, though. For example, the European Union banned the use of livestock growth-promoting antimicrobials completely prior to 2006. However, in Canada, regulatory policy surrounding antimicrobials in stocks is lagging behind. Prior to 2013, little restrictions were in place. In 2014, Canada created a federal action plan to assess and develop a framework to combat antibiotic resistance and overuse. As of December 2018, in Canada, antibiotics may no longer be labeled as growth promoting, and the use of all antibiotics require veterinary oversight. This means all medically important antibiotics need a prescription to purchase them. This regulatory policy shift may have increased awareness of antimicrobials in Canada, and it seems like it's plausible that Canada may follow in the EU footsteps regarding banning antimicrobials. Our objective of this paper is that we aim to test the stability of public preferences for a ban of use of subtherapeutic use of antibiotics in livestock. Given the new regulatory ban introduced in 2018 in Canada, we tested preferences for antibiotics prior to the ban through a survey in 2017, then after the ban through a survey in 2019. The thought is that there may be greater awareness of antimicrobials in Canada, and the consumers may have altered their preferences for antibiotic use in livestock. Talk about the methods that we'll be trying, and that we did try. We used 2 national online surveys, one in 2017, another in 2019, which we would identify the public's interest in questions regarding farm animal husbandry, as well as willingness to purchase different meat and dairy products. The online survey was sent out across Canada to consumers and took about 15 minutes. The 2017 survey, we had 500 completed surveys, 750 in 2019. To investigate public preferences for the ban of subtherapeutic use of antibiotics in livestock, we asked a referendum type question at different taxation levels. The question shown on the slide was asked to participants with a randomized tax levels ranging from $50, $100, $200, $500, and $1,000 tax levels. Participants were only asked this question once with a randomized tax level. The survey also included general individual characteristics such as age, education, among others. We also asked more specific questions resulting in understanding participants' awareness for antibiotic use, animal attitudes, which we'll explore. This slide shows some general descriptive statistics of the 2017 and 2019 survey, as well as the pooled results. We can see that across the surveys, general statistics of the individuals remain the same. Gender, age, income groups, household size, and post-secondary education, all the same across years and in the pooled survey. This allows us ease for comparison across the years. Even the general dietary responses remain the same with little to no change. For awareness of antibiotic resistance, we found a good portion of our respondents in both of the years had heard or read about the issue of antibiotic resistance. This indicated that the general Canadian population was relatively aware of the issue. However, we also see that in 2019, more individuals were more likely to respond they were unaware. This slide shows that, much like mentioned in the previous presentations, across both years, although there was neither agree or neither agree, the majority of people were searching for this antibiotic-free meat. However, in our surveys, we asked the participants to select a definition of what antibiotic-free meat meant to them. In both the years, half of the respondents indicated that the definition of antibiotics has not been used ever during the life of the animal from which the product comes, was their version of antibiotic-free. However, a third of the respondents also defined antibiotic-free as antibiotics have been used during the life of the animal, but only for medical reason, and a vet prescribes an antibiotic. No antibiotic residues remain in the livestock product when sold to the consumers. These results show that the consumers have different beliefs and opinions towards what antibiotic-free means, especially with half of all Canadians wanting no antibiotics are used at all with antibiotic-free. In this, we see from the referendum type question that across all tax levels, no matter what, they're for a ban of antibiotics. Greater than 60% of all of them. So how did we model this? Our dependent variable is a binary variable reflecting whether an individual voted for, 1, or against 0, a ban of antibiotics. The independent variables are split between general characteristics of the concern, such as gender and education, as well as general attitudes. For attitudes, we include a trust variable that measures the consumer level of trust for advocacy groups, and agreement questions for farmer knows best, and if they think an agreement to growth promoting is an inappropriate use of antibiotics. Our final variable measures the animal attitudes mentioned before, which measures the individual's attitude towards animal welfare. Our model results in both the 2017 and the 2019 models, we find that the significance across some of our variables remain the same. For both general characteristics, as in gender and education, we're in significance towards the individual voting yes for a ban. Surprisingly, the tax was insignificant towards voting yes for a ban, which may indicate that regardless of the tax level at all, individuals have strong opinions towards the ban and are willing to pay more in taxes for that ban. Having high levels of caring towards animal welfare made consumers more likely to vote yes for a ban in both 2017 and 2019. These results were similar for consumers who were more concerned regarding the use of antibiotics. If a consumer would agree to the farmer knows best for using antibiotics, then they were less likely to vote yes for a ban of antibiotics. This is interesting as it may reflect that the consumers trust farmers are using antibiotics for sick animals, and that a ban would allow farmers to care for those animals which are sick. Trust and advocacy groups, advocacy organizations was only significant in 2017, where more trust in these groups led to individuals being more likely to vote yes for a ban. This is where we expect individuals to get their information from. It is surprising that it's no longer significant in 2019. 2019 is, though, still positive, so individuals may be slightly influenced by this, but not significant extent to change their opinion. For the variable of agreement to grow over this inappropriate use of growth promoting as an inappropriate use of antibiotics. This may be because of the 2018 regulatory change providing more insight towards the use of antibiotics, and consumers may hold a stronger opinion after this regulations. For example, now that farmers may go through vets to obtain antibiotics, consumers may have construed that as this meaning farmers were using antibiotics in appropriate price. So our results so far show that individuals over time have held stable on their opinions regarding their preferences for banning antibiotic usage of subtherapeutic use in livestock production. We found that individuals who are more aware and concerned about animal welfare and the overall concern about antibiotic resistance prefer a ban on antibiotics completely. In general, it seems that the Canadian population on the consumer side want a ban on antibiotics, and they do not want any antibiotic residue in their meat. The problem that we face today, though, is that antibiotics are used to treat sick animals in the livestock industry. With a ban, antibiotics may leave many farmers left without a treatment option. Without this treatment option, farmers face an unknown future, unknown cost. And it may result in many livestock producers with no better than what they're currently using as antibiotics. What will be the alternative? I myself, as a calf producer, without antibiotics, my own concern would be that animal welfare would decrease. Without being able to treat the sick animals, would I have to face higher costs finding alternatives, or worse, decreased animal welfare? We are currently working on a study exploring producer opinions and concerns over the use of antibiotics. It will be interesting to see if there's a disconnect between this livestock industry and the consumer. Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you to all of our speakers. We'll now open up the floor for discussion. Attendees, you'll be able to either ask questions via the chat or you can unmute yourselves and ask questions out loud.
Well, maybe I'll I'll start with kind of a big question. Since you guys are all interested in consumer attitudes about agriculture and science and things like that, I was kind of wondering whether, you know, the COVID-19 coronavirus has created any changes in attitudes, or do you think it's changed any attitudes towards the biological sciences and towards science in general, and or is it likely to? I know coronavirus isn't, doesn't affect this coronavirus, at least doesn't affect livestock, but I was just sort of wondering, how this all the discussion about coronaviruses and that coronaviruses came from animals and these sort of zoonotic diseases. I'm sort of wondering how that's affecting Canadians' attitudes and their and what they feel about science and government research. Anybody want to take that one on?
I can start if you like, and then maybe other people can chip in. I've done a very tiny little bit of research, and my casual observation is that trust around some of these issues in the government, interestingly enough, and in scientists has actually increased because of the coronavirus. And it could be just that we're relying more on these people for direct information in this very confusing environment. So that could be what people are responding to. I'm dying to get some work in the field to find out exactly what we feel about technology in this space. Are we willing to accept technologies, particularly for livestock production, that we might have thought as intrusive technologies before. Now that we see how interconnected the whole process is a bit more. And my suspicion is that we will be more accepting. Whether that sticks in the longer term or not, will, as you know, will depend on what other public agents decide to contribute to the mix. By the way, Canadians' desire for the vaccine, the most recent survey about a week or so ago for the COVID vaccine was that fewer Canadians now want to take it, although it was over 80% in the early days. Now more people are getting concerned. Whether that's an imported concern from US conversations, we can't tell. But maybe
probably due to our president.
Well, that could be, but I'd hate to say that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is there knowledge about zoonotic diseases? I mean, have past in Canada, have there been important zoonotic diseases that have been a problem, and how have people dealt with that? Or how is government research dealt with zoonotic diseases?
We certainly had an incident of swine flu back in the days when we talked about the H1N1 virus a lot and called it swine flu, but it was actually that a person working on a farm actually infected the pigs, not the other way around. But yes, I think there is a general awareness of it. And interestingly enough, I'm going to shut up shortly, but my other research on chronic wasting disease in deer and elk is showing that there's actually quite a well-articulated understanding that eventually it's quite likely we will find that that disease can be transmitted to humans. So I find that very interesting, given how relatively few people probably eat venison on a regular basis, although rural and indigenous communities are probably way overrepresented in that group and are potentially at risk if we ever do find out that it gets transmitted to people. So I think there is a general awareness about that we were actually surprised in our research came out so clearly.
If nobody else has questions, I'm just going to keep asking all my questions. Anybody else want to get in on? I guess maybe picking on Ellen a little bit. The other question I have is, again, sort of related to coronavirus and all of that. With all this research that's going on vaccines and how to make vaccines faster and the therapeutics research and all that. I mean, is there, for us in agriculture, there's also always often been a big spillover from medical research into agriculture research. And I'm just wondering whether some of the animal scientists in Canada, or maybe Jose, maybe you've talked to some of the scientists at ILRI or places like that. Are they talking about or thinking about possible spill-ins from this human medical research and all this huge amount of investment that's taken place? Have you heard anything about it? Anybody?
I don't want to monopolize things, but I will say that the animal scientists that I work most closely with, particularly the ones that are crossover between animal science and veterinary medicine, are very, very much involved in some of the vaccine development research here. So they are